Welcome to the third episode of Collecting Journeys, a video series put out by the Royal Philatelic Society of Canada. I'm Greg Redner, and I'm the president of the RPSC. And today we have one of Canada's most noteworthy philatelists, Charles Verge. Charles has been a regional, national, and internationally accredited judge. He's a National Grand Award winner, as well as two National Reserve Grand Award winners as an exhibitor. Of course, he's a philatelic writer, and in addition to his books, has written articles for any number of stamp publications. He was the president of the Royal Philatelic Society of Canada from 2000 to 2006, president of the Ireland Philatelic Association, 1993 to 1997, and president of the American Association of Philatelic Exhibitors from 1999 to 2002. He's a member of the Council of the Writers Unit number 30 of the APS. He has served on Canada's Post Stamp Advisory Committee, has been a member of the board of the Vincent Graves Green Philatelic Research Foundation, and a member of the Green Foundation Expertising Committee. He's a fellow of the Royal Philatelic Society of Canada and of the Royal Philatelic Society of London, and was awarded the British North America Philatelic Society's Order of the Beaver. He was invited in 2020 to sign the roll of Distinguished Philatelist. And this year, he received the Alfred F. Lichtenstein Memorial Award for Distinguished Service to Philately, offered by the Collectors Club of New York. Charles, thanks so much for being with us here today.
You're welcome.
So tell us about your family and growing up.
I am massively pure Canadian. Although my last name is Verge, it is not the most prevalent part of my DNA. I'm very, very French Canadian. In fact, the Verges were latecomers. They only arrived in 1725 in Newfoundland. All my other relatives, basically founded New France and Acadia, and even my Basque ancestors arrived in the 1740s. Unfortunately, he didn't do very well because he murdered a couple of people and then was drawn and quartered and whatever the French used to do at the time. I've got a long DNA in this country. My father died when I was very young. I was 11 months old. And my mother returned to live with her parents. And she was pregnant with my sister at the time. We lived in a French Canadian household. My grandparents and my mother decided, and I admired them for that in the late 1940s, to speak to us in English at home and sent us to French schools because they thought that French was a more difficult language to learn. And it was interesting also, the other concept was they figured that, if they spoke English to us, we'd be more comfortable speaking to my father's family. Well, it turns out my father's family is fully bilingual as well, so it didn't really matter. So one of the techniques my mother used for babysitting was put me in a corner with books, or she bought me my first stamp album and a packet of stamps. And that's how it all started, basically. Basically, I was pretty much a loner, and I went to private school. So when I came home on the weekend, I had no friends in the neighborhood. And I didn't do a very good job of making them either. But this little packet of stamps that my mother started me with basically turned out to be an indication of my future. I liked looking at these little works of art. I got fascinated by geography and history and art and in whatever you find on postage stamps. And it turned out that because of that, I basically studied history in university and geography and political science. And I like, unlike most collectors, I never stopped. And so the process basically continued, a bit of allowances. I would buy stamps, and it only really, I had a world album and I filled that out. And it only was in my first year of college that I met my first mentor. And he started suggesting that I should specialize. And so I considered what I could do. And I wanted something that, I could complete with the little means I had. And so I decided to start collecting Ireland. And because I thought, well, they only started issuing stamps in 1922. And we're talking here about 1964. So this wasn't, a great period of trying to get everything. I never did. I never completed Ireland. I was, the end when I sold it, I was still missing one stamp. But then that progressed to other things, and I started collecting Irish airmail covers, and so it just went on like that. And by the 1980s, I had gotten married in 1970, and I have 3 daughters. And by the 1980s, I moved. We were living in Ottawa, and I got involved with the Ottawa Stamp, the RA Stamp Club. And I met my second mentor there, and that was Colonel Stephen Luster, who was an American who decided, well, he was posted in Ottawa as the director of the U.S. Defense Contract Office. But he was a stamp collector, and as soon as the Ottawa guys found out about him and his experience in running stamp shows, they promptly put him in charge of RPSC and the annual stamp show in Ottawa. It was a regional show at the time, and he was there for about 2 years, and he taught me how to run a show. And so I took over from him, and we changed it from a regional show to a national show, and it's been that ever since. At the same time, I met my third mentor, which was Ralph Michener. Now, Ralph Michener was a very different person. He was, my daughters would tell you he was scary. He could be very taciturn, and but he was a master of wordsmithing, and he encouraged me to write. So when he passed on in 1995, I took over his column that he had been writing in the Ottawa Citizen for quite a while. The Ottawa Citizen had a tradition of having a philatelic column in the non-philatelic newspaper for many years, and it had started well before me and before Ralph. It went on to the 1940s. It started around the 1940s, and it lasted till I left. We ended it because they wanted to close down that column in 2005. So it continued for a very long time. So I learned from Ralph how to write and how to put articles together. So that's where the other aspect of my life comes from, where writing articles and writing books. At the same time, I got involved in the Royal, and this was in the late 1980s, and there were suggestions that I start training as a judge, which I did in 1989, and then I eventually got on the board of the Royal, and from there it just grew like topsy. I went from the board of the Royal to getting involved in international shows in Canada '92. Well, I had gotten slightly involved in CAPEX '87, but more substantially in Canada '92, partly because it was being held in Montreal, and being bilingual, it was easier, and I lived in Ottawa at the time. But it just went. I mean, it just grew, and I got involved in all kinds of organizational things from at the national level, the international level, and I was commissioner to many shows. I've been an international judge since 1995. I've judged quite a few shows. I also been the secretary to juries internationally. And I finished my career internationally. Not that I might not judge again, but it's I've changed my attitude to what's left of my life and how I should deal with it. And so I'm curtailing considerably the international life. I finished at the international life being in charge of training the judges, the international judges, and being the lead trainer, writing the curriculum. It was one of the most satisfying jobs that I had in the international world. So in my specialization collecting, if I go back to that, I went from Ireland to Ireland airmails to Ireland to Irish censorship, and then to Irish postal history, particularly Dublin. That's all gone. And I decided that I was more interested in ensuring that I could judge properly and that I could give proper feedback to exhibitors. So I decided I would try to exhibit in every class and try to attain a gold medal at the national level. I did that for about 20 years, I guess, and went through many of the classes. I still have 3 I'm not done, and I will never do them. Because again, it's the change in my orientation, my future. And I found the interest in all of these classes, and I found that if I did them, I could certainly help be better in helping other exhibitors. But I also found fascination in some of those classes, thematics, for example, or first day covers. The last one that I attempted was revenues. And 2008, I was sitting in a jury room in Israel, and the apprentice was a British dealer. And we were talking about this whole concept of judging in every class. And so he asked me what I hadn't judged. And he said, well, I said, what I hadn't collected yet. And I told him at the time, revenues was one of them. And he said, oh, I have a beginner's collection of revenues, because I wasn't going to start from scratch anymore. At the age I had at the time, I didn't have the time to start from scratch. So, oh, okay, beginner collection. I said, so what country? And he says, Haiti. And I thought, okay, why not?
Yeah.
I speak fluent French. I can read the documents, and why not? So I purchased a collection, and I started looking at it, and I got fascinated, because it goes well beyond revenue stamps. It goes back to the early 1800s when the Haitians got independence, and even prior to that, there were revenue documents during the French part of Haiti, San Domingo. So I found a few more things and put the exhibit together, showed it internationally, and then all of a sudden, I couldn't find any more material. I spent 5 years, almost 6 years, not finding anything except one little piece here and then. And about 3 years ago, at the Stockholm show, I was asking a friend of mine how I could get rid of it, and he told me who I could talk to. And I'm a good procrastinator, so I came home and I did nothing about that. And all of a sudden in 2020, these 4 collections appeared in Europe, offered by private treaties. So I bought 2 of the 4. In the same year, a US dealer collector's auction material was put on sale in the US, and there was a substantial collection of revenues. And so I bought it all. And so now it's turned out to be a much better exhibit. First of all, I just completed a lot of the holes I had. But it also has turned me on into writing about Haitian revenues. There hasn't been a Haitian revenue catalog ever. And there was an attempt at cataloging Haitian revenues in the 1960s as an article in American Revenue. And there's so much new material, so much new information available. It is difficult in one way because with the state of the country and the destruction of a lot of things, including the archives, some of the archives, it's very difficult to find background information. But there's another side to that, and that's because we have the net, and because people are putting more and more on the net, and because libraries are digitalizing books. Some of the rare material, the books that were issued in the 1860s, 1870s, which were a compendium of Haitian revenue laws, have appeared on the net over the last 3 or 4 years. So now we have primary sources that we can use to study. So that increases your ability to get extra points for research and knowledge.
Yes.
So I'm right now, my intent is to, I got involved in CAPEX 22 as well. My intent right now is to concentrate on the Haiti, the first day covers. As you know, I wrote a book on the St. Lawrence Seaway, which could be the subject, how I got to it, and could be the subject of another talk, but I had never, one of the criticisms I got about the book was from the first day cover collectors who wanted me to make a complete listing of all the cachets. And cachets, as you know, is the left side of the envelope, which is decorated by whoever produces the cachet. I never did that because I thought it would unbalance the book. And each chapter had a reason. Each chapter should be more or less the same length. And the second reason is that I didn't collect them. I borrowed most of them to put in the book, of those that are there. And but I decided to start collecting them after a while because, that's also when I decided to start collecting the first day covers in the 1950s and the Canada 1950s. I couldn't do it without doing the Seaway because 1959, but that also brought me into bringing the American first day covers. But I never wanted to exhibit it for 2 reasons. One is I couldn't figure out how to treat the double country thing and the cachet makers who use cachets cross borders. And the other reason is to get a good result in an exhibit, first day cover exhibit, you have to talk about the production of the stamp at the beginning of your exhibit. But production of the stamp includes varieties. And St. Lawrence Seaway major variety, but the book is written about just the inverted seaway. I didn't have one. I do now. So I have no reasons why I can't put the the exhibit together. I just have to see how I'm going to treat it and develop it. But, and then the other aspect is I got very, very interested in when I found out how far back my family goes. And I got very, very interested in genealogy. And when I look at some of my ancestors, and it's scary. In one way, it's scary to me. In another way, I'm very appreciative of the fact that they founded this country. And many of these individuals are in the history books, and many of the individuals are on the Canadian Dictionary of Biography. And when when I think that I went to school, grade school and high school, I learned about these people, but I didn't know them. They were my relatives.
Wow.
I mean, and I don't necessarily descend directly from all of them, but I descend from quite a few. So that has also interested me, particularly when you find out that some of them are prostitutes and some of them are murderers and some of them have been murdered. And
right.
It's just, the whole thing is fascinating. As my daughters would say, they prefer my family's genealogy than their mother's, because of their mother's genealogy, they go back 3 generations or 4 generations, and then they're into the aristocrats of Britain and Scotland. So
yeah,
they really don't care. They really don't care
exactly.
about that. They're more interested in prostitutes and murders. So yeah, and I never thought, the third element of this is I never thought I would have grandchildren. I now have a granddaughter who was adopted, but she's still my granddaughter. And I'm going to spend time with her. At my age, I'll be 76 next week, and I just find that I would like to play with this 3-year-old, 4-year-old, and before I get too old to not play or not be able to play. And I'm noticing that there are things I used to do with children and my own, and I can't do anymore. And I regret that, but I'm just going to enjoy what's left of it before I pack my bags up and move back to Montreal. Basically, it's a long way around to tell you about my family and to tell you how I got around and getting involved in stamps and where I'm at and where I've been. But it's always been, I really, really much more enjoy writing about the hobby, managing the hobby, than collecting. I do collect and I enjoy what I collect when I collect it. But there's always seems to be an association with why I collect certain things.
Right.
I like the county of Papineau in Quebec. Well, that's where my mother's family is from. It started with my grandfather dying in 1971 and going through drawers in the summer house. The summer house. It's not a cottage, and finding 2 dozen, 3 dozen postcards addressed to my grandparents. And you just, okay, well, it starts growing. Just, oh yeah, well, okay, well, yeah. Then I used to. I told my children later on that when I took them on a tour, that I used to have relatives in all the villages, basically from Montreal to from Ottawa to Lachute. Now I have relatives in all the Roses Cemetery. So my daughter's got a grand tour of the cemeteries. But it's just, I'm very much a family man. I'm very much interested in my family history, and I really believe that we need to understand the past to deal with the future.
Yeah, I agree. Having been born in the U.S., I knew all about the U.S. side of my family and the fact that my dad's family had fought in the Revolutionary War and had sided with the breakaway nation But I was fascinated when I moved here to discover, and having done the same thing you did, to dig back through and discover that there also was a large portion of my family that nobody knew about that emigrated to Prince Edward County and were actually
Oh,
some of
yes.
the founding members of Rednersville. So that was fascinating to me, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah. So
You know, it's and you can associate. You know, I when I give presentations and I talk to people, I keep saying to them, you know, don't be scared about exhibiting. You can start small. You can start 1 page, 2 pages, but think of what you might like to do. It's, you know, you can write a story of your family. Yes, you can be lucky and have people who are on stamps, but you don't need to have people who are on stamps. You can do other things like, you know, find a postcard of the hospital you were born in. Try to find it in the year you post it in the year you were born in. Try to find it in the month you're and in the day you were born. That still eludes me. I have the postcard, I have the right year, but the month and the day is. And you know, so you don't have to be a world-class exhibitor. You don't have to have a world-class collection. What you have to do is you have to enjoy what you're doing and choose your subject that you want to do and do it the way you want to do it.
Right.
If you want to play at an exhibiting level, then you play by the rules. Otherwise, you know, enjoy what you're doing. So you want to put a postcard with your stamps, or you want to put matchbox or match book covers, go right ahead. You know, there's nothing wrong with that. And because it's yours, your choice, your decision. And if you don't do it, if you try to force yourself into following the rules to start with, you're not going to enjoy it.
Exactly. And I find, like, when I started exhibiting, what was the most beneficial part? I knew I was never, at least early on, never going to attain a high mark for what I was doing, but it helped to focus my collecting. And the judges' comments, which were always very helpful and very understanding, actually at times opened new avenues to my collecting that I would never have thought about. So, I mean, you know, I'm with present company excluded and only one other person in the room, chances are that I'm never going to get a best in show at an international level. But that's not really why I do it. I do it because I enjoy the hunt and I enjoy the digging for information and knowledge, you know, and that's, I think people miss that part of it.
You know, it's first of all, it's 1%. It's 1/10 of 1% of all collectors, in the broader sense of the definition, who exhibit internationally, and that 1.1% is even extremely smaller when you come to those who have great collections and win large golds and golds. Okay, yes. There's a level for everybody. And yes, you can put your exhibit into a local show or a regional show, or it's whatever you want to do. And if you have financial limits, then so be it. Choose a subject that you can afford. But the other thing that I keep telling people is that it's not only the material. It's not all, you know, a large portion of the points you get in an exhibit, you can work hard at getting them, and you can get them. Research, knowledge, presentation. It doesn't take. There's 5 points for presentation. Make it look good. One of the things that people do, unfortunately, when it comes to research, is they kind of rely on other people's work. And some of that work is so old and it's not accurate to start with. I don't know, maybe 15 years ago, it has to be 15 years ago, I was living in Ottawa. the Green Expert Committee got a stamp called London to London. And
right.
there was only about 100 stamps. And it was a special, what to be a special flight from London, Ontario to London, England, which crashed and disappeared. And when it comes to that kind of material at the Green or difficult postal history, they usually give it to me, so because they know I'm going to do the research and everything else. I discovered that in the writings on the London to London stamps and flights, it said there are 4 known and a cutter. This is the information on this side of the ocean. On the other side of the ocean, in Britain, it says there are 4 known and a cover. You would think they would match. Not at all. In Britain, 2 of those 4 are in the British Library and are part of the Fitzgerald airmail collection that was donated to the library in the 1940s, or maybe a little later. Anyway, after you do all of this, you find out that in fact there are 13 stamps and 1 cover. What happens is that the people on this side of the ocean only look at material and only look at the literature on this side of the ocean. And on the other side of the ocean, that's about what they do as well. And when somebody says, oh, 3 of these stamps were sold at auction in 1987, could you go please look at these auctions? And
yes,
can you compare all 3 if there's images? And oh, they're not the same. And sometimes they'll tell you where they came from. Oh, and by the way, 3 sold in 1987 and 2 are in captivity in the British Library. Hey, where's your 4? You know, 3 plus 2 make 5 in my vocabulary. So yeah, one of the things, one of my major collections is the first day cutters of the dental, the 1959 U.S. anniversary of the American Dental Association. And, you know, you can rely on the American First Day Cutter Journal and look at the cachet makers and that kind of thing. But if you want to do something good and you can afford to travel a little bit, you go down to Washington, and in the National Postal Museum in Washington, they have files of the 3rd Assistant Postmaster General. And in each file, it's by Scott number. And in each file, it tells you exactly what the process was of the designing of the stamp. And to the point that they even tell you how many first day cutters were printed, were serviced, how many with 1 stamp, 2 stamps, 3 stamps, 4 stamps, 5 stamps, and et cetera, and even do a full paint. So you get to know the rarity factors by doing that. If 650,000 Seaway covers or first day Seaway covers were serviced in the U.S. and only 430 of them have 3 stamps on them, you know what the rarity factor is compared to everything else. And yeah, the pane, the single pane is there's only 1 known. Yeah, that's even rarer. But so you got this source of information, and then, well, who printed the stamps? Well, the Bureau of Engraving and Printing did, and they had a bunch of files. The Postmaster General, before they transferred their holdings, which is mainly not documentation, but mainly material, artwork, and things like that, to the National Postal Museum. They had a source of it. The more important thing, what am I doing? I'm doing the American Dental Association. Pick up the phone, call the American Dental Association. Do you have a library? Yes. Do you have an archivist? Yes. Can I speak to the archivist? And I had a lovely chat with this woman, and she said to me, I told her what I was doing. She said, oh, we have a full filing cabinet on that stamp.
Wow.
And the documents that go with it, and the whole story that we won't tell you, well, I will tell you, it took me 7 years to get from that answer to finally getting there in Chicago. And, but when I got there, it was huge treasure trove of information. It answered hundreds of questions that I had. And it brought forward a lot of the things that are said to exist. And yes, they exist. They're in Chicago at the American Dental Association.
Right.
So if you're collecting something like that, or, the Canada issued stamps at one point on Toronto Dominion Bank and on Home Hardware, pick up the phone, call Home Hardware and say, do you have information? And can I please see it? So if you're doing a study of that stamp, and the Seaway was the same thing. It's again, it was the BEP, and again, it was the National Postal Museum, and again, it was Postmaster General, and again, it was going down to Cornwall, talking to the guys at the, it's just, that's how you get better research points, and you get more original research and personal studies results. So you can put together something without necessarily having to spend a lot of money.
Yeah.
I digress.
No, that's okay. You've done a wonderful job of answering almost every question that I sent you without me having to ask it, which is great. Let me just go off script just a little bit, because you've known most of the late 20th century, last half of the 20th century's great philatelists. Are there any stories that you would be comfortable sharing about people?
I did want to mention that before I answer that question, I did have a fourth mentor, and that was Michael Medesker. And Michael Medesker was my mentor, as was Harry Sutherland, but I wasn't as close to Harry as I was to Michael for the international world. Those were the guys that mentored me throughout the international world and introduced me to a lot of people. I came late, a little too late in some of the greats, the Welburns, the Jarretts, the Green. They were all gone, or not. I was still, when I joined organized philately, or from being memberships and societies, when I started working for organized philately in '87, these guys were gone, or in the case of Green, he passed away the year after. So the greats of Canadian philately, I really did not have much of an interaction with them. Most of the people that I spend a lot of time with and tend to be the people who have more than just philatelic interests. I like the rounded Renaissance kind of individual. So I'm close to Cheryl Gaunce and Peter McCann and some of the Americans, and Ted Nixon, which you will be interviewing, I guess, at one point. And but they all have a world of their own, which is of interest to me. They also have the ability to share information and to help direct your thoughts and where you're going or where you're trying to go. And some of them were a little bit fortuitous. I mean, Peter McCann and I happened to be follow each other as president of the American Philatelic American Association of Philatelic Exhibitors, And then he was president of the APS at the same time I was president of the RPSC. So we were able to do a number of things together for the benefit of North America philology. And for example, in 1981, Harry and Bud Sellers, who was then the president of the APS, put together a memorandum of understanding about judges. And so that it basically recognized the fact that if you were an American judge, you could judge in Canada, and you could, if you were a Canadian judge, you could judge in the US. When Peter and I got around to this, we decided that the agreement was 20 years old, and it did not give the same access to apprentices and to exhibitors. So what we were looking for is changing it so that we could have the apprentices be able to count their apprenticeships at an American show, their Canadian apprenticeship, and vice versa. The same thing with exhibitors, that their Vermeil medals at the time, that was the 5-level medals, were, if they earned it in the US, it was valid in Canada, and they could apply to go exhibit internationally. But we went a step further as well, as we decided that we'd have basically free trade. And so over the years, things evolved to include our using the same judging manual, which the Americans produce, to having all the Canadian winners at national shows participate in the World Philatelic Championship, the North American Philatelic Championship, as they call it. And the same applies to the one frames, and the same applies to the youths. And so there have been 4 Canadian youths who have won the championship since it started. The interchange and the exchange that has permitted has been very, very beneficial to the apprentices, the judges, and the exhibitors. I mean, if I have to point out to one individual, it would be Harry Sutherland, and he died in 2006. He was a curmudgeon. He stated very clearly he did not like children, and rugrats, as he was called them. And he didn't have he didn't have much to do with people that didn't A, produce, and B, have an intellectual, it's really not that, but having a level that he could deal with. Okay. Right. Well, it turns out that he had compartmentalized his lives, and he was a lawyer. He was a commercial lawyer, and when the opposing lawyer found out that in court that they would be facing him, most of them tried to promptly settle out of court. They didn't want to have to deal with him in court. He was a very, very knowledgeable and collector of wines. And he was also a gourmand and a gourmet. And then when it comes to the children part, which is very, very interesting, he didn't want to have anything to do with children, but he spent a long part of his life involved in the early childhood education process. In the philatelic world, he recognized talent. He knew who to deal with or to give some responsibility to. And he was very wise in the way he would look at these individuals. It would be gradual and by step, and the responsibilities he would turn over to them. And he wasn't, a great collector either. He did everything that everybody does and showed his exhibits nationally and showed them internationally, but he never really won anything so he was more interested in the somewhat similar to me in the organizational aspects of the hobby. He had a wicked sense of humor, if you could put up with it. He could be very sarcastic. But he was a very interesting person. He was extremely generous, and he was a confirmed bachelor, and but women absolutely adored him, and he just had that knack of talking to them. And I learned from him that one of the things that is useful is if you're asked to do things where the audience is a mixed group. Okay, you will know that you adapt your presentation to your audience, and in philately, if it's a mixed group, don't start talking about errors, freaks, and oddities. You talk about, and that's where as I said to you, we agreed to do this, I go on tangents, and I do that very well at these presentations. And but you have to do things that will interest others. I refused, when I go to a stamp banquet, I refuse to sit beside stamp collectors, and I refuse to talk about stamps. There's a number of spouses there. I mean, if the whole table is just stamp collectors, that's fine. But but there's a whole bunch of spouses there, and find something interesting to talk to them. You don't have to talk about stamps all the time.
That's right. That's right. Well, that's my life with him. That's beautiful. That's exactly the case. So yeah, you've answered pretty much everything that I wanted to ask you about, which was terrific. One last question: if you didn't collect stamps, what would you collect?
Well, I have a house full of art, so let's start with that. In my younger years, I collected antiques. I tend to be more minimalist now these days. I tried to not collect anything, partly because my daughters are much older and they don't need anything. So, and I have no nephews and nieces, and so who would I collect for? The art here is tied in to a couple of wills, so there is some end to all of this art that we have. No, I wouldn't collect anything. Yeah. I mean, I used to collect family photographs, partly because they came my way. Being the eldest child of an eldest child of an eldest child of an eldest child, they tended to come my way, as did the documents that went with them. But what do you do with them? My kids, fine. They like the idea of finding them, knowing who these are, but you can digitalize them. So what do you do with the originals? As a historian, the last thing I want to do is destroy them.
Yeah.
And but where do they go? And so it's one of the most one of the things I find most difficult is when you go to an antique store and there are these buckets and buckets full of photographs, old photographs. Okay. And I once went into one, and there was this young couple there. She was in tears, and he was trying to console her. And it turns out that what her problem was is that she didn't even know what her grandparents looked like.
Yeah.
They had no photographs in the family. And so she was looking for some kind of idea of what these people look like. And virtually all of these photographs in bins in antique shops have no information on them except perhaps who the photographer is. And there's nothing in the back. And I made damn sure that before my mother died, she was going to give me everything she knew about who was on what photograph. But now you can also play the game with facial recognition, with Apple particularly, where you can, put a photograph, put another one, and they'll say, 100 years difference between the two, but that's the same person.
Yeah.
But it's more a question now at my age as to trying to get rid of stuff around and get new stuff, and what am I going to do with what I have?
Right. Right.
I have a very, very small family, so it's not, like, as my daughters say, between my parents, my uncles and aunts, we're going to get 9 sets of bone china. What are we going to do with 9 sets of bone china? They're going to get jewelry, but none of them wear it. It's a real dilemma as to where you're going, what you do with this stuff. So I know I stopped collecting other things that weren't related to the stamps. Like I collect postcards of Papineau County, but those are related to, and I don't collect every village of the county. I just collect a few villages. Those are directly related to me. But no, bottom line is no. I'm not collecting, I won't collect, and I didn't really collect art, and I really didn't collect antiques. I just had them at one point. And when you're young and you're newly married and you live in the country, you go to auction sales, and that's how you build your furniture. And house sales and things like that. So yeah, we tended to buy antiques, what passed as antiques, something out of the Eaton catalog of 1903, and that's kind of thing. But so yeah.
Well, thanks for taking the time to talk to us. It's been fascinating. And it's been a wonderfully easy venture on my part. I just get to listen, and I'm very grateful for that. So thank you. And if you're enjoying these videos and you'd like to suggest a topic, or there's something you'd like us to cover, please get in touch. If we've piqued your interest about the Royal Philatelic Society of Canada and you'd like to find out more about it, you can go to rpsc.org on the net, and you'll find all the information that you need there. Thanks very much.